Imagine you're alone on a quiet country road, the kind where the darkness feels heavy, pressing in from all sides. The only sound is the slow rhythm of your footsteps on the dirt path and the occasional rustle of wind through the hedges. Then, out of nowhere, something changes. The air grows colder, unnaturally still, as if the world itself has stopped breathing. You strain to listen, heart pounding, and that's when you hear it, the distant thunder of horse hooves, slow at first but growing louder, closer. You can't see anything yet, but somehow you know you're not alone. What would you do? Would you run? Would you freeze, staring into the dark, hoping you're imagining things? Or would you listen? Listen for a name whispered on the wind. Listen for the screech of unseen wheels or the crack of a whip that doesn't belong in this world. This is no ordinary rider. It's something older, something worse. For centuries, stories of the Dullahan have haunted Ireland. Stories of a headless specter that rides through the night, a silent herald of death that cannot be bargained with or stopped. Some call it a warning, others call it a curse, but one thing's for certain. If you see it, you'll never forget it. So settle in and let me tell you the tale. But be warned, once you hear the Dullahan story, it's not so easy to shake. Some legends linger, and some whispers never stop. This is the story of the Dullahan, the Headless Horseman. The Dullahan, Ireland's most fearsome headless spectre, didn't just spring into existence fully formed. Like many creatures of myth, it evolved, its roots twisting through ancient beliefs, rituals, and fears that shaped Ireland's folklore for centuries. To understand the Dullahan's chilling presence, you have to go back to the older, darker days of the Celts, when the otherworld loomed close, and death was not just a moment, but a force. One theory ties the Dullahan to Crom-Duff, a pre-Christian fertility god worshipped across ancient Ireland. Crom-Duff wasn't your typical benevolent deity. His followers believed that to ensure bountiful harvests and survival, sacrifices were necessary. Human sacrifices, to be exact. Every year during Lugnasad, the harvest festival, it's said that lives were offered in exchange for good crops, grim but vital in a world where a failed harvest meant starvation. In some tellings, Crom-Duff demanded heads specifically, a connection that feels a little too close to the Dullahan's imagery to ignore. Severed heads held a strange kind of power in Celtic spirituality, symbolizing the soul, wisdom, and even supernatural insight. Warriors would take their enemies' heads in battle, believing they retained the person's life force or knowledge. The Dullahan carrying its own decapitated head is likely an eerie reflection of this ancient reverence, warped into something far more terrifying over time. But the world changed. Christianity swept through Ireland, and figures like Crom-Duff were demonized, their once sacred rites rebranded as barbaric and evil. What happens to a god when belief fades but fear lingers? It doesn't disappear, it transforms. The Dullahan became a product of this shift, its form mutating into something that embodied punishment, inevitability, and death itself. Where Crom-Duff's sacrifices were seen as transactional, the Dullahan became a spirit that offered no bargains, only doom. The legend also mirrors Celtic ideas about the otherworld, a realm that lay just beyond human reach. The Celts saw death not as an ending, but as a journey to another place, where spirits roamed freely. Samhain, the festival marking the end of the harvest, was when this otherworld came closest to ours. The veil thinned, spirits crossed over, and the Dullahan may have emerged as a reminder that the dead, and death itself, were always near. The figure became a way to explain the inexplicable. Death could come suddenly, without reason, and the Dullahan embodied that randomness, riding into the night with no warning, no mercy. It's also worth considering Ireland's long tradition of oral storytelling, where tales shift and grow with each generation. The Dullahan likely began as whispers, stories meant to scare people into respecting ancient customs or staying indoors at night. Over time, it became a symbol of mortality that outlasted its pagan origins. Whether born from Crom-Duff's sacrifices, Celtic reverence for severed heads, or simply the human fear of death's inevitability, the Dullahan is a figure shaped by centuries of belief, change, and lingering dread. At its heart, the Dullahan is a reminder of two universal truths: that death comes for everyone, and that no matter how much we try to understand it, the unknown will always carry a chill. The Dullahan's appearance is as unsettling as the legend surrounding it, an image that refuses to be forgotten once it's described. The figure itself is a walking contradiction, both surreal and uncomfortably real, grotesque yet strangely captivating. Unlike other Irish spirits, which might disguise themselves as something more ordinary, the Dullahan wears its purpose on its sleeve. It is death made visible. At the heart of the Dullahan's terror lies its severed head. The head, which it carries tucked under one arm or held high for all to see, is a ghastly thing. It's said to glow faintly in the darkness, like decaying moss on a grave, casting an eerie light that illuminates its path. This glow isn't warm like a candle or a lantern. It's cold, pale, and wrong, as though it comes from the other world itself. The skin is taut, like dried parchment, pulled so tightly that it reveals every bone and hollow beneath. The mouth, frozen in a grotesque grin, stretches unnaturally from ear to ear, as if mocking the living. Then, there are the eyes. The Dullahan's eyes are wide and unblinking, wild and searching, capable of seeing across great distances and through the darkest of nights. They seem to burn with an intelligence that shouldn't belong to something so decayed. It's said that when the Dullahan holds its head high, it can see everything, past, present, and future. There's no hiding from its gaze. It can peer through windows, over hills, and into homes, seeking out the doomed with chilling accuracy. For those who catch a glimpse of the head's glowing face, the image lingers long after the Dullahan is gone, as though the specter has left its mark on their very soul. The Dullahan's mount is no less terrifying. Most stories describe a massive black horse, larger than any living beast, with glowing red eyes and nostrils that spew fire or smoke. Every stomp of its hooves strikes sparks from the earth, and the sound of its pounding gait echoes like distant thunder. The horse's movements are unnaturally fast, almost as if it glides rather than runs. In some accounts, the Dullahan rides not one horse, but a headless team pulling the Cuesta Bodar, the silent coach, a spectral carriage made of bones and draped in black. The wheels screech and grind as they turn, and the lanterns that light the coach are fashioned from hollowed-out skulls, their flickering glow mirroring the Dullahan's severed head. The Dullahan itself is cloaked in darkness, both literal and metaphorical. It's often said to wear a long black robe, loose and flowing, that billows like smoke as it rides. The fabric, if it can even be called that, seems alive, shimmering and shifting as though made of shadows. In other tales, the Dullahan wears armor, its surface blackened and dull, save for an occasional glint of light when it catches the moon. Everything about the creature's clothing seems designed to blend into the night, heightening its ghostly, silent approach. But there's more to the Dullahan's presence than what's visible. People don't just see the Dullahan, they feel it. Before the rider is spotted, the air grows heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. Animals react first. Dogs whine and hide, horses panic and refuse to move forward. Even the bravest souls find their stomachs churning and the hairs on the backs of their necks rising before they see the headless figure emerging from the gloom. It's as if the very earth recognizes the Dullahan and holds its breath in dread. Then there's the whip. Some versions of the legend say the Dullahan carries a whip made from a human spine. This weapon is more than a tool. It's a symbol of its authority over life and death. The whip strikes those who interfere, blind those who watch, and cuts through the air with a sound that's said to chill the blood. The spine itself, pulled from the dead, seems to carry an energy of its own, a physical manifestation of the Dullahan's connection to mortality. These terrifying details make the Dullahan one of the most distinct and frightening figures in folklore. Unlike many spirits, it doesn't disguise its intentions. It doesn't wear a mask or veil to soften its horror. Instead, it rides openly, carrying death with it, a stark reminder of the inevitability we all face. It is death stripped of symbolism or sentimentality, raw, unstoppable, and unmerciful. The Dullahan's grotesque beauty and unshakable aura of doom ensure that those who encounter it never forget. It's not just a harbinger of death. It is death personified, a nightmarish rider that emerges from the shadows to remind us that no one escapes the end. The Dullahan isn't a chaotic force. Its behavior is deliberate, methodical, and unrelenting. It doesn't wander aimlessly through the night like lesser spirits might. Every appearance of the Dullahan carries purpose, a grim task set in motion that cannot be undone. At its core, the Dullahan is a harbinger, an executor of fate that arrives only when death is inevitable. Its movements are unmistakable. The sound of its black horse's hooves pounding the earth is often the first sign of its approach, though some accounts say the Dullahan appears silently, as if materializing out of nowhere. Its path is always direct and singular, leading it to the home, bedside, or final resting place of its intended soul. This isn't a spirit that can be reasoned with or delayed. If the Dullahan has set its sights on someone, there's no turning it away. One of the most chilling aspects of the Dullahan's behavior is its voice, or lack thereof. It doesn't speak as a living being would, nor does it engage in idle conversation. Instead, when it stops at its destination, it whispers a single name, the name of the person whose time has come. That whisper seals their fate. Once spoken, there is no appeal, no negotiation, no chance for escape. The act itself is hauntingly theatrical. Imagine a cold wind cutting through the night as the Dullahan lifts its glowing, severed head high. Its wide, unblinking eyes scan the landscape, and then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, it speaks the doomed person's name. Those who hear it describe an overwhelming dread, a weight on their chest that lingers long after the creature is gone. For the person marked, there's no grand confrontation or fight for survival. Death simply arrives, inevitable and unstoppable, wrapped in the Dullahan's grim silence. The Dullahan's connection to death places it firmly between the mortal world and the otherworld, a place central to Celtic mythology. The otherworld isn't a land of fire and torment. It's an ethereal realm where spirits reside, separated from the living by a thin, invisible boundary. At certain times of the year, particularly Samhain, when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest, the Dullahan rides with greater frequency. During Samhain, the boundaries blur, and spirits cross freely between realms. It's in these moments of liminality that the Dullahan is most active, as though the thinning veil gives it the power to move more easily between life and death. Crossroads are particularly important to the Dullahan's lore. In Celtic tradition, crossroads represent liminal spaces where different paths and different worlds intersect. They're places of decision, transition, and change, making them natural meeting points for the supernatural. It's no wonder that the Dullahan often appears at these intersections. To travelers, stumbling across a headless rider at a crossroads was not just terrifying, but deeply symbolic. It was as if death itself stood at the point where all choices end, waiting to claim what it is owed. The Dullahan doesn't linger, though. It comes and goes like a shadow slipping through cracks in the world. When it rides away, it doesn't leave behind the typical signs of a haunting. No lingering voices, no echoes of footsteps. The only trace of its visit is the quiet, lingering dread among those who saw it or heard its whisper. The Dullahan's aversion to being watched adds an unsettling layer to its legend. For such a powerful figure, it might seem strange that it reacts so violently to human curiosity. But there's a reason for this. The Dullahan isn't just a messenger of death, it's a guardian of the boundary between life and the otherworld. Watching it, trying to understand it, disrupts that delicate balance. Anyone foolish enough to spy on the Dullahan quickly regrets their decision. The creature lashes out with its whip of human spine, a weapon as grotesque as it is symbolic. It doesn't just punish the body, it blinds the onlooker as though severing their connection to the mortal realm itself. Some tales suggest that the whip doesn't merely blind the curious, it steals something deeper, leaving them haunted for the rest of their days. This punishment serves as a stark warning. The Dullahan doesn't want to be understood. It doesn't want to be studied or followed. It exists on its own terms, bound to rules that no mortal can comprehend. To interfere with its purpose is to meddle in forces far beyond human understanding. The Dullahan is not driven by malice. It doesn't hunt for sport or torment the living for its own amusement. Its purpose is far more solemn. It is an agent of fate, carrying out a task it cannot abandon. This makes it all the more terrifying. It doesn't hate the souls it claims. It simply comes for them as unfeeling and inevitable as death itself. This lack of emotion is what sets the Dullahan apart. Unlike other spirits in folklore, which might be appeased, bargained with, or even befriended, the Dullahan doesn't interact with the living beyond its whisper. It exists outside human concerns. Its motives inscrutable, its actions irreversible. It rides when it must, calls the name it was given, and then vanishes. That's it. There's no moral lesson to be learned, no escape hatch for the unlucky. The Dullahan doesn't bring closure or answers. It brings finality. But while the Dullahan is feared, it is also respected. It represents the thin line between life and death, a line that humans have always been both fascinated by and afraid to cross. The figure's grim role as a messenger of mortality ensures that its legend endures, whispering quietly through the centuries. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. For all its fearsome abilities, the Dullahan isn't invincible. Like many supernatural beings in Irish folklore, its power is bound by ancient laws and limitations. The most notable of these weaknesses is gold. Even the smallest piece of gold, be it a coin, a ring, or an amulet, is said to repel the Dullahan. If someone throws gold in its path, the creature will immediately recoil, stopping its approach and fleeing the scene. But why gold? In Celtic tradition, gold was often seen as a symbol of purity, divine favor, or a barrier against dark forces. Its ability to ward off the Dullahan suggests that this death spirit, for all its terrifying power, cannot endure the presence of something sacred or untouched by decay. This weakness to gold gave rise to practices in rural Ireland where people would carry gold coins or jewelry as protection against the Dullahan. It's also one of the few ways to survive a direct encounter, turning the story from one of inevitable doom into a faint glimmer of hope for those prepared. Another limitation lies in the Dullahan's rigid adherence to its purpose. It does not act indiscriminately. The Dullahan cannot harm or kill anyone who isn't already marked by fate. Its role is singular and unwavering. It seeks out the soul it was destined to claim and no one else. This adherence to rules, though terrifying, also creates boundaries around its actions. Unless provoked, the Dullahan won't lash out at random. Similarly, its aversion to being watched could be seen as a limitation. While it punishes the curious harshly, its need for secrecy reveals an aspect of its nature. The Dullahan operates in shadows, at the edges of human perception. To be seen, even briefly, disrupts the balance it maintains between the mortal world and the other world. What makes the Dullahan so unnerving is its connection to liminality. It exists on the threshold between life and death, a boundary that humans have always feared yet been fascinated by. Crossroads, midnight rides, and the thin veil of Samhain. These are moments and places where the ordinary world intersects with the other world, and the Dullahan thrives in these spaces. Seeing the Dullahan at a crossroads wasn't just an omen, it was a message. Choices had already been made, and death was now unavoidable. Similarly, Samhain, the festival that marks the beginning of winter, is the time when the veil between worlds grows thin. The Dullahan's activity during this season reinforces its connection to the otherworld. It is during Samhain that death feels closest, when the living can almost sense the presence of the dead. The Dullahan doesn't cause this thinness, it simply exists within it, stepping effortlessly between the two realms to fulfill its duty. Liminal spaces and times are unsettling because they blur boundaries we rely on. Light and dark, life and death, safety and danger. The Dullahan embodies this blurring. It reminds us that death isn't some faraway concept, but a force that walks among us, silent and inevitable. The Dullahan, while unmistakably Irish, is a legend that has shifted and evolved as it traveled across regions, storytellers, and centuries. While its roots remain grounded in Celtic folklore, its eerie image of the Headless Rider resonates far beyond Ireland's rolling hills. Across the island itself, slight regional variations add layers to the tale, and as the Dullahan story spread worldwide, it left echoes in modern fiction, media, and other cultural folklore. Arguably the most famous Headless Horseman outside of Ireland, Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow introduces us to the vengeful horseman who haunts the quiet town of Sleepy Hollow. While the Headless Rider in Irving's tale pursues Ichabod Crane for personal revenge, its appearance, the eerie silhouette, the missing head, and the relentless chase, feels unmistakably inspired by the Dullahan. Where the Dullahan represents the inevitability of death, Irving's horseman becomes a spirit of wrath, hunting the living in a distinctly American twist on the theme. The Dullahan's terrifying image has made it a favorite for creators of fantasy media. In games like Castlevania, Final Fantasy, and Dark Souls, the Dullahan often appears as a powerful undead foe, its headless form wielding supernatural abilities and weapons. These interpretations lean heavily into its mythological roots, emphasizing its connection to death and the otherworld. Similarly, modern fantasy authors frequently draw on the Dullahan's imagery to create haunting antagonists or cursed figures. The Headless Rider trope continues to captivate filmmakers. Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow reimagines Irving's tale with heavy Gothic influences, while Japanese anime like Durarara present the Dullahan as a modernized version of the legend, blending the old with the new. In these adaptations, the Dullahan is often reinterpreted as a tragic figure, cursed to walk between worlds rather than simply a harbinger of death. The Dullahan's enduring popularity in modern storytelling speaks to its versatility. It can be terrifying, tragic, or mysterious depending on the context, but it always represents a force that transcends human understanding. While the Dullahan is unique to Irish folklore, its themes, death, liminality, and headless spirits, appear in many cultures worldwide. These similarities reveal shared fears about mortality and the unknown. In Scottish folklore, the headless drummer is a ghostly figure who haunts castles and battlefields. Its drumbeat, like the Dullahan's silent coach, signals impending doom, often warning of unrest or death within a family. Though less violent than the Dullahan, the drummer's presence carries a similar air of inevitability. The Arthurian legend of the Green Knight presents another headless figure, albeit with a vastly different tone. In this tale, the Green Knight challenges Sir Gawain to strike him down, only to rise again, holding his severed head. While the Dullahan is a harbinger of death, the Green Knight's story is one of transformation and testing, reflecting themes of courage and mortality. Japanese folklore introduces the Nukakubi, a spirit whose head can detach and fly through the night, seeking victims. Like the Dullahan, the Nukakubi's severed head is both its greatest strength and its most terrifying feature. Though rooted in different cultural traditions, the image of the floating autonomous head taps into a universal discomfort with dismemberment and the supernatural. Germany and Scandinavia have their own versions of the Headless Rider, often appearing as an omen of war, plague, or personal tragedy. These figures share the Dullahan's silent, relentless demeanor and their role as messengers of doom. The Dullahan's continuing power lies in its ability to strike a deep, universal chord. Death is a mystery we all face, no matter the culture or time period. The Dullahan embodies this inevitability in a way that is both personal and terrifying. It doesn't reason, it doesn't bargain, it simply is. And so, the story of the Dullahan comes to a close, but the silence it leaves behind is hard to shake. Picture it, a lone rider, its severed head grinning in the dark, the pounding of hooves fading into the distance. It doesn't linger, and yet somehow it feels like it's still there, just beyond your line of sight, just at the edge of your imagination. These tales passed down through generations are more than ghost stories. They're reminders of what we fear, of what we can't control, of the thin line between life and whatever comes after. The Dullahan isn't cruel or vengeful, it's something far worse, it's inevitable. And maybe that's what makes it so unforgettable. So the next time you're walking a quiet road at night and the air grows still, take a moment to listen. If you hear thunder when there's no storm, or a name whispered on the wind, don't look, don't follow. And whatever you do, don't watch. Some things aren't meant to be seen. Because if there's one thing the Dullahan has taught us, it's this: death doesn't knock, it arrives.